The desperate call. The sky burned red as enemy ships rained fire down on the city. Buildings crumbled, and the ground shook with each blast. Smoke and dust filled the air, choking those who tried to flee. Screams echoed through the streets as alien civilians ran for their lives. It was chaos. It was destruction. It was the end of hope. Inside the Grand Hall, the leaders of the planet gathered. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. They were powerful beings, rulers of advanced civilizations, but today they felt helpless. The enemy was too strong, too brutal. Their weapons were far superior, and their numbers were endless. What do we do now? One council member shouted, his voice trembling. Our armies are falling. Our defenses are shattered. We are doomed. We cannot fight them. Another leader cried. They came without warning, destroyed our fleets, and now they are here to wipe us out. Panic spread through the room. Voices rose in anger and fear. Some demanded surrender, others wanted to flee. No one had a plan. No one had hope. Then, a strong voice cut through the chaos. There is one option left. All eyes turned to the oldest member of the council, Grand Advisor Thalvorn. His face was lined with age, his eyes weary but sharp. He stood tall, his robes flowing as he walked to the center of the hall. What option? Someone asked, desperation clear in their voice. Thalvorn took a deep breath, his gaze hardening. We must call for help. Murmurs spread through the room. Call for help? From who? Their allies had already abandoned them. No one wanted to stand against this enemy. There is one race, Thalvorn continued, his voice low. A species spoken of only in legends, beings of unimaginable power, creatures who survived on a world of death and danger. They are known as Deathworlders. Silence fell over the hall. The word sent chills down their spines. Deathworlders, monsters from a nightmare. Stories were told about them to scare children. It was said they were savage, ruthless, and unstoppable. They are just legends, one leader scoffed, trying to hide his fear. Stories to frighten the young. No, Thalvorn said firmly. They are real, and they are the only ones who can save us now. The council was divided. Some believed Thalvorn, others thought he was desperate and foolish. But the enemy ships were drawing closer, their weapons destroying everything in sight. Time was running out. We have no choice, Thalvorn insisted. If we do nothing, we will all die. If the legends are true, the Deathworlders can stop this invasion. But at what cost? Another council member asked, fear in his voice. What if they destroy us too? Thalvorn's face softened, and he looked at the burning city through the shattered windows. We are already dying. Better to risk everything than to die without a fight. Reluctantly, the council agreed. They had no other hope. It was either call for the Deathworlders or face extinction. The ancient communication device was activated, a relic from a time long forgotten. It was said to send a signal across the stars, to the far reaches of space where the Deathworlders were rumored to dwell. Thalvorn stepped forward, his hand shaking as he touched the cold metal. He hesitated, fear gnawing at him. Would they answer? Would they help? Or would they bring more destruction? Closing his eyes, he sent the distress signal, his voice echoing through the device. To the Deathworlders, we beg for your aid. Our world is dying. Our people are perishing. If you hear this, please, help us. The message was sent, the signal traveling across the universe. The room was silent, the only sound the distant explosions outside. Thalvorn opened his eyes, his heart heavy. He didn't know if they would respond. He didn't know if they were even real. But he had done all he could. The council waited, their fear growing as the minutes passed. Would they be saved, or were they calling upon a greater doom? Far away, beyond the stars, the message was received. A dark fleet stirred, engines roaring to life. Eyes as cold as the void watched the signal, a voice breaking the silence. They called for us. Let's answer. The Deathworlders were coming. The sky was dark, filled with smoke and fire. Alien civilians hid wherever they could, inside crumbling buildings, underground bunkers, and narrow alleyways. The enemy ships circled above, their weapons ready to end everything. Inside the Grand Hall, the council waited in fear and silence. They had sent the call for help, but no one knew if it would be answered. Some had already lost hope, their faces pale with despair. "They are not coming," one council member whispered, his voice broken. "We are alone." "Maybe they never existed," another said, his eyes filled with regret. "We trusted in a myth." Grand Advisor Thalvorn stood by the shattered window, his gaze fixed on the sky. Deep down, he also feared the worst. Had he been wrong? Had he doomed his people by calling for the Deathworlders? Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the air. The ground trembled, the walls shaking. The sound grew louder, like a storm approaching. The council looked up, their eyes widening in shock. The clouds parted, revealing massive shadows descending from the sky. Dark, ominous ships cut through the smoke, their surfaces gleaming with unknown metals. They were unlike anything the council had ever seen. Powerful, terrifying, and otherworldly. The Deathworlders had arrived. The enemy ships turned, their weapons aimed at the newcomers. They fired, beams of energy shooting towards the dark fleet. But the Deathworlder ships didn't flinch. Their shields absorbed the attacks without a scratch. Then the Deathworlders fired back. Their cannons roared, releasing beams so powerful that they shattered the enemy ships in an instant. Explosions lit up the sky as enemy vessels were torn apart, their pieces raining down like fire. The city shook with the force of the battle. But this time, the destruction wasn't from the invaders. It was the wrath of the Deathworlders. Inside the council hall, the leaders watched in awe and fear. The power of the Deathworlder fleet was beyond anything they could imagine. They moved with precision, each shot calculated and devastating. "By the stars," one council member whispered, his voice trembling. "They are unstoppable. They fight like monsters," another said, his eyes wide with horror. "No mercy, no hesitation." Thalvorn's face was pale as he watched the carnage. The legends were true. The Deathworlders were warriors of destruction. They didn't just fight. They dominated. On the battlefield, the enemy began to retreat, their ships fleeing in panic. But the Deathworlders gave no chance for escape. They hunted them down, destroying every last vessel. The sky cleared as the enemy fleet was erased from existence. The city fell silent, the echoes of battle fading away. The Deathworlder ships hovered above, their engines humming with power. They had won, but their presence alone was terrifying. "They saved us," one leader whispered. "But what now?" A voice echoed through the council hall, deep and cold. It came from the largest ship, its form massive and ominous. "We heard your call." The council members froze, fear gripping their hearts. They had summoned these beings, but now they wondered, what price would they pay? The largest ship descended, its shadow covering the Grand Hall. The ground shook as it landed, its doors hissing open. Figures emerged, their forms hidden in dark armor. Their eyes glowed with a cold, unnatural light. They were tall, strong, and moved with a predator's grace. Each step was heavy, filled with purpose. Their presence was suffocating, like standing before a force of nature. Thalvorn's heart raced as the leader of the Deathworlders approached. His armor was ancient, covered in scars from countless battles. His face was hidden behind a helmet, his voice echoing with power. "You called for aid," the Deathworlder leader said, his tone calm but chilling. "We answered." The council members fell silent, their fear overwhelming. They had asked for salvation, but were they facing a greater doom? Thalvorn stepped forward, his knees weak, but his voice steady. "You saved us. We are grateful." The Deathworlder's eyes glowed brighter, his presence heavy. "Gratitude means nothing. Survival has a cost. A cold chill ran through the room. The Deathworlders had saved them, but what price would they demand? The answer would decide their fate. The air was thick with tension. The Deathworlder leader stood before the council, his glowing eyes cold and piercing. His armor was covered in strange symbols, marks of battles long forgotten. Behind him, his warriors stood silent and unmoving, like shadows ready to strike. Grand Advisor Thelvorn swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had called for help, but he never imagined it would come like this. These beings were powerful, ruthless, terrifying. What price do you demand? Thalvorn asked, his voice trembling. The Deathworlder leader tilted his head, his gaze unyielding. We saved your people. We ended your enemies. But we did not come out of kindness. His words were cold, void of mercy. The council members shivered, their eyes wide with fear. They had hoped for salvation. But now they faced something far more dangerous. The leader's voice echoed through the hall, his tone sharp. Your world owes a debt that must be paid. Thalvorn's heart sank. He had feared this. Nothing in the universe came without a cost, especially not from creatures as powerful as these. But what could they want? Riches? Resources? What? What do you want from us? Thalvorn asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Deathworlder's eyes glowed brighter. Your allegiance. Your loyalty. From this day forward, your world belongs to us. The council gasped, horror spreading through the room. They had traded one conqueror for another. The enemy was defeated, but now they were at the mercy of the Deathworlders. One council member stood up, his fists clenched. You can't do this. We are a free people. The Deathworlder leader's gaze snapped to him, cold and sharp. Free? You were moments away from extinction. We gave you life. Now, it belongs to us. The defiant council member trembled, his courage crumbling. These beings were not negotiators. They were conquerors. Thalvorn took a deep breath, his mind racing. They had no choice. The Deathworlders were too powerful. But maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. We accept, Thalvorn said, his voice low. Our world will serve you. We owe you our lives. The Deathworlder leader's eyes softened, just for a moment. Wise. You understand survival. He turned away, his warriors following. Prepare your world. We will return, and when we do, you will be ready to serve. With that, the Deathworlders boarded their ships. The engines roared, and the sky trembled as they ascended, disappearing into the stars. The council watched in silence, their hope shattered. They were alive, but they were no longer free. Thalvorn sank to his knees, his heart heavy. He had saved his people, but at what cost? They had called for salvation, and the Deathworlders had answered. But the true price of survival was just beginning. The skies were silent once more, but the memory of the Deathworlders' ships lingered. Their presence had been overwhelming, a force that defied understanding. As the council dispersed, their faces pale and hollow, Grand Advisor Thelvorn remained behind, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He felt the weight of his choice pressing down on him. He had saved his people, yes, but he had also surrendered their freedom. Now they were bound by a debt that could never be repaid. Was there truly no other way? A voice asked. Thalvorn turned to see Elder Maverick, his old friend and the council's wisest voice. The elder's eyes were weary, his shoulders bent under the same burden. We were at the edge of extinction, Thalvorn replied, his voice heavy. The enemy would have destroyed us. I did what was necessary. But at what cost? Maverick's gaze was sharp, piercing through the fog of doubt clouding Thalvorn's mind. We traded one conqueror for another. We saved our lives, but we lost our freedom. Thalvorn's fists clenched. He knew Maverick spoke the truth, but he also knew the harsh reality they faced. Freedom means nothing to the dead. Maverick sighed, his shoulders sinking. Perhaps, But what future awaits us now? Under their rule, will we even recognize ourselves? Silence hung heavy between them. Falvorn had no answer. He had secured survival, but he had no control over what came next. Days passed, and life on their world began to change. Deathworlder envoys arrived, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. They spoke little, their orders precise and unquestionable. Factories were repurposed, resources redirected. Everything was reorganized to serve the Deathworlder's will. The people watched in fear, their eyes wide as they realized the price of their salvation. Their world was no longer their own. They were subjects now, servants to a power they did not understand. Falvorn stood at his window, watching the Deathworlder ships moving across the sky. His heart ached as he saw his people bowing their heads, their spirits broken. He had called for aid. He had summoned the Deathworlders, and they had answered. But their help had come with chains. A knock echoed through his chamber. Falvorn turned to see a young messenger, his face pale. "Grand Advisor, the Deathworlder leader requests your presence." Falvorn's heart tightened. He knew this day would come. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his robes and prepared himself. As he walked through the halls, he could feel the eyes of his people on him. Some were grateful, their faces showing relief at being alive. Others were bitter, their expressions hard with anger and betrayal. He could not blame them. He had made the choice for all of them. He had sacrificed freedom for survival. Now he would face the consequences. Entering the grand hall, Falvorn stood before the Deathworlder leader once more. The air was cold, the atmosphere heavy with power. The leader's eyes glowed as he spoke, his voice calm and commanding. "Your world is now part of our dominion. You are to prepare your people for integration." Falvorn's chest tightened. What does that mean? The leader's gaze was unyielding. "Your culture, your identity, all will be assimilated. You will serve as part of the dominion, your people's talents used for our purpose." Falvorn felt a cold chill run down his spine. They were not just servants. They were to be erased, molded into something unrecognizable. His voice shook as he spoke, his heart breaking. "Is there no other way?" The Deathworlder's eyes flickered, a hint of something almost like pity. "This is mercy. We could have let you die. But now you have a place in our empire. Accept it or be destroyed." Falvorn's shoulders sank. There was no choice. They were bound by their debt, chained by obligation. He bowed his head, his voice hollow. We will comply." The Deathworlder leader turned away, his presence cold and distant. "Then prepare your world. The Dominion does not tolerate resistance." Falvorn stood alone as the shadows closed in. He had saved his people's lives, but he had also sealed their fate. The chains of obligation were heavy, and they would never be free again. Days turned into weeks, and the changes grew more severe. Factories no longer produced goods for the people but weapons and supplies for the Deathworlders. Ancient monuments were torn down, replaced with symbols of the Dominion's power. The people walked with bowed heads, their eyes hollow. Their language was being replaced, their traditions erased. They were being shaped into loyal subjects of the Dominion. Grand Advisor Falvorn watched it all with growing despair. He had chosen survival, but at a cost he had never imagined. His people were losing themselves, becoming shadows of who they once were. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Falvorn heard a whisper. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there, a murmur of defiance. He followed the sound, slipping through the narrow alleys until he reached the old ruins of the Great Hall. There, hidden in the shadows, he saw them. A small group, no more than a dozen, huddled together. Their faces were determined, their eyes burning with anger and hope. Among them was Elder Maverick, his voice strong and unwavering. "They think they have broken us," Maverick said, his fists clenched. "But they are wrong. We still remember who we are. We still have our spirit." The others murmured in agreement, their faces fierce. They take our language, our history, but they cannot take our hearts. We will resist. We will fight. Thalvorn's heart raced. Rebellion? It was madness. The Deathworlders were too powerful, their technology beyond comprehension. Any resistance would be crushed. Yet, as he watched the fire in their eyes, he felt something stir within him. Hope. Stepping out from the shadows, Thalvorn faced the group. Gasps echoed as they recognized him, their faces a mix of fear and anger. "What are you doing here?" One of them spat. "You brought them upon us. You made us slaves." Thalvorn lowered his head, his voice heavy with guilt. "Yes, I did. I thought I was saving us, but I was wrong." Maverick stepped forward, his eyes hard. "Then why are you here, traitor?" Thalvorn took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening. "Because I want to fix my mistake. If you are planning to resist, then I will stand with you." Silence fell, thick and tense. They stared at him, disbelief on their faces. "You would risk everything?" Maverick asked, his voice low. "You would fight the power you call to our world?" Thalvorn nodded. "I have seen what they truly are. They saved us, but they also enslaved us. I cannot let our people be erased. I cannot let our world die, even if it costs me my life." The group looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Could they trust him? Could they follow the man who had betrayed them? Maverick stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Words mean nothing. If you wish to fight, then prove it." Thalvorn met his stare, his resolve hardening. "Tell me what to do." Maverick's face softened, respect shining in his eyes. "We are gathering supplies, weapons, anything we can find. We need someone to get information on their movements, their defenses." Thalvorn's heart pounded, spying on the Deathworlders. It was suicide. If they caught him, they would destroy him without mercy. But he had already lost his honor. He had nothing else to lose. "I will do it," he said firmly. "I will find a way." Maverick's lips curled into a faint smile. "Then you are one of us now." The group's tension eased, their eyes warming. They began to explain their plans, their hopes, their fears. They spoke of sabotage, of rebellion, of freedom. As the night deepened, Thalvorn felt the weight on his heart lift, just a little. He had made a terrible mistake, but now he had a chance to make things right. They would fight. They would resist. And maybe, just maybe, they would be free again. But they were up against the might of the Dominion, against the Deathworlders who had conquered countless worlds. Their rebellion would be a spark against a storm. Would it be enough? The shadows seemed to whisper around them, carrying the echo of destiny. The fight for freedom had begun. Under the cover of darkness, Thalvorn moved swiftly through the shadows. His robes were plain, his face hidden beneath a hood. He was no longer the Grand Advisor, no longer the man who had bowed to the Dominion. Now, he was a rebel. The Deathworlders had established their command center in the heart of the city, inside the ancient palace that once symbolized his people's pride. Now, it was a fortress, guarded by soldiers with weapons that could disintegrate flesh in seconds. Thalvorn's heart raced as he crept closer. One wrong step, one noise, and it would all be over. But he couldn't back down. He had promised to gather information, to find a weakness in the invincible army that held his world in chains. Slipping through a narrow passage, he reached the courtyard. Deathworlder soldiers marched in perfect formation, their faces hidden behind terrifying helmets. Their armor shimmered with advanced technology, humming with power. Thalvorn watched them with a mix of fear and awe. These beings were legends, conquerors of galaxies, destroyers of civilizations. To defy them was madness, but it was also necessary. He moved quietly, sticking to the shadows, his eyes scanning every corner. Then he saw it, a small terminal near the supply station. It was unguarded, its screen glowing faintly. His pulse quickened. That terminal could hold the information they needed. Patrol routes, weapon cages, communication codes. If he could access it, they might have a chance. He darted towards it, his movements quick and silent. His fingers danced over the controls, his knowledge of ancient scripts guiding him through the unfamiliar interface. Lines of data filled the screen. Maps of the city, marked with troop positions, supply routes and weak points. A list of high-ranking officers, their schedules, their movements. It was everything they needed. Suddenly, a voice echoed behind him. Cold. Metallic. "Who are you?" Thalvorn froze, his heart dropping. He turned slowly, his eyes widening as he faced a towering Deathworlder soldier. The soldier's red eyes glowed beneath his helmet, his weapon pointed directly at Thalvorn's chest. His mind raced. There was no escape. If he ran, he would be cut down in seconds. If he fought, he wouldn't stand a chance. But he couldn't fail. Not now. Not when hope was so close. Thinking quickly, Thalvorn straightened, his posture shifting. I am one of your informants," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I was sent to gather information on rebel activity." The soldier tilted his head, his weapon lowering slightly. "Informant. I was not informed of this." Thalvorn kept his face calm, his heart pounding. The orders came directly from Commander Varric. He wanted to ensure no spies had infiltrated our ranks. The soldier's eyes flickered. "Commander Varric." "Yes," Thalvorn continued, his voice firm. "He said you were not to be told. It was a test of security." The soldier hesitated, uncertainty creeping into his posture. "I see. That does sound like Commander Varric." Thalvorn held his breath, his fingers twitching by his side. If the soldier saw through his lie, it would be the end. After a tense moment, the soldier lowered his weapon fully. "Very well. Carry on with your mission. But be quick. This area is restricted." Thalvorn nodded, keeping his movements calm. "Of course. I will be gone shortly." The soldier turned and marched away, his footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Thalvorn waited until he was out of sight before exhaling, his body trembling with relief. That had been too close. Quickly, he downloaded the data onto a small device hidden beneath his robes. His mission was complete. Now he just had to get out alive. He moved swiftly, retracing his steps through the shadows, his eyes sharp for any sign of danger. Every noise made his heart jump, every shadow seemed to move. But finally, he reached the outskirts of the city, the ruins where the rebels gathered. They were waiting, their faces anxious. Maverick stepped forward, his eyes questioning. "Did you get it?" Thalvorn pulled out the device, his expression grim. "I did. We have everything we need to strike back." The rebels gathered around, hope flickering in their eyes. Maps, schedules, weaknesses. It was the spark they needed to ignite the flames of rebellion. But Thalvorn knew it wouldn't be easy. The Deathworlders were powerful, merciless. If they failed, their world would burn. Yet, as he looked at the faces around him, the determination and courage shining through, he knew they had to try. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. The air was heavy with tension as Thalvorn stood before the gathered rebels. Their faces were hard, eyes burning with resolve. They were a small force, outmatched and outgunned, but they were determined. He held up the device containing the stolen data. "This is our key," he said, his voice strong. "It shows their patrols, their supply routes, and their weak points." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hope sparked in their eyes. For the first time, they saw a path to fight back against the invincible Deathworlder fleet. Maverick stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Then we strike. We hit them where they're weakest. We make them fear us." The rebels nodded, their faces grim. It was dangerous. It was nearly suicidal. But it was their only chance. Thalvorn activated the hologram, projecting the city's map. Red dots marked the Deathworlder patrols, moving in rigid patterns. Supply depots and communication hubs were highlighted, vulnerable to sabotage. "We attack here at midnight." Thalvorn pointed to a key outpost. "Their forces will be at their lowest. We take out their communications, cut off their supply lines, and weaken their defenses." "What about reinforcements?" a voice called out. "If they call for help, we'll be overwhelmed." Thalvorn's eyes hardened. "They won't get the chance. We'll disable their communication hub first. They'll be isolated, vulnerable." A fierce cheer erupted from the rebels. The plan was bold, but it could work. It had to. As midnight approached, they moved through the ruins like shadows, silent and swift. Thalvorn led the way, his heart pounding, his senses sharp. They reached the communication hub, its metal walls gleaming under the moonlight. Guards stood at the entrance, their faces hidden behind metallic masks. Maverick signaled the others, his fingers dancing through the air. 2 rebels moved forward, their steps quiet as they approached the guards from behind. In one swift motion, they struck, and the guards crumpled to the ground without a sound. Thalvorn rushed inside, his eyes scanning the room. The control panel was unguarded, its screens glowing softly. He connected the device, his fingers flying over the keys. The system flickered, then went dark. The Deathworlders were cut off. "They're blind," Thalvorn whispered, his voice tense. "Now." Explosions rocked the city as the rebels attacked the supply depots. Fire and smoke filled the air as crates of weapons and rations were destroyed. The Deathworlder patrols were thrown into chaos, their communication down, their orders lost. Thalvorn watched from the shadows, his heart racing. The Deathworlders stumbled through the smoke, shouting in confusion. Their perfect formations were broken, their invincible aura shattered. But then, a roar echoed through the air. A giant figure appeared, clad in black armor, his eyes glowing red beneath his helmet. Commander Varric. Thalvorn's blood ran cold. Varric moved with terrifying speed, his weapon cutting through the rebels like a scythe. His voice boomed, cold and merciless. "Fools, you dare defy the Deathworlders." Maverick charged at Varric, his blade flashing. But Varric moved faster. With one brutal strike, Maverick was thrown to the ground, his body limp and broken. No. Thalvorn's scream was swallowed by the chaos. His friend, his comrade, was gone. Varric's eyes turned to Thalvorn, glowing with malice. "You cannot win. You are insects before us." Fear gripped Thalvorn, but it was swallowed by fury. He stepped forward, his voice shaking with rage. "You invaded our world. You enslaved our people. And now, we fight back." He raised his weapon, his hand steady. Varric laughed, his figure towering like a dark god. "Then die with your rebellion." The two charged at each other, the world around them erupting in flames. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed, light and shadow dancing around them. Varric was stronger, faster, his strikes like lightning. But Thalvorn fought with desperation, his movements wild and unpredictable.